So my name is Erin Gordon. I'm the Director of Genetic Counseling for the Coriell Personalized Medicine Collaborative. And I just want to provide a little bit of information about interpreting your CPMC results and some of the genetic versus environmental contributions, implications for family members, and of course some of the limitations of the CPMC testing. So hopefully this picture is familiar to all of you. It comes up on all of your disease-related reports, and we start, when we talk about any of the complex conditions in educational sessions like this, we always start with this slide because this is one of the most important things we can tell you. So the diseases that are included in the Coriell Personalized Medicine Collaborative are not solely caused by your genes, right? They're considered complex diseases, and they're caused by the interaction of multiple different genes and the environment. So none of the information that we can give you through the CPMC is diagnostic, right? Because we don't know everything about you, and we're also not looking at every gene under the sun. So this image gives you some sense of the contribution of your genes versus the environment to each individual condition. So you'll see this in every report. You'll see that the balance changes. In some cases, for example, your age-related macular degeneration result, the genetics bucket is heavier. It's about 80% genetic and only 20% non-genetic or environmental. Some other things like coronary artery disease, it's closer to 50-50. So this information just gives you a little bit of perspective on how much your genes contribute versus how much the environment contributes. When we zoom in on this, one thing that's really important to understand is that there are multiple genes filling this bucket. So we are telling you about one particular gene, but there are multiple different genetic variants that influence the genetic component of not only this condition, rheumatoid arthritis, but of each condition. So although we're saying this is 53% genetic, we're not telling you about the whole 53%. We don't understand the whole 53%. The scientific community has not synthesized all of that information yet to say, okay, this gene accounts for 10% of that 53, this one accounts for 2% of the 53. So we really only have an early insight into this genetic bucket. In this particular case, we're telling you about a gene in the TNF pathway, which is one of the genes, one of the types of treatments that Dr. Feinstein talked about. So I'll say here, someone had asked about the relationship between genetics and treatment selection. And at this point, based on what we know about the genetics of rheumatoid arthritis, that's not something that is routinely done. Whether or not that's something that healthcare providers will be able to do in the future, that's a possibility. We don't know. The problem is that people who have rheumatoid arthritis probably have genetic changes in lots of different pathways. So to say, well, if you have a genetic variant in the TNF pathway, you should be given this drug, but not these other ones. Well, you probably have variants in lots of different pathways. So it might be hit or miss. Decisions may be made down the road based on the number of variants in each individual pathway. So maybe if you have 5 changes in the TNF pathway, but only 2 changes in the PTP pathway, then we would give you a drug related to TNF and not PTP. But we're just not at the point now in medical treatment where we can incorporate all of that information and make treatment decisions based on that. We know that multiple genes play a role, but the relative contribution of each one is still unknown. So we can't, again, we can't say this accounts for 5%, this accounts for 10%, this is 20%. We can't tell you how strong each one is, and we might, once we understand that down the road, that information then might be able to be used in treatment decisions. So in this case, we've looked at one particular variant. Again, it's in the TNF pathway. In all of your CPMC results, we'll give you what's called an RS number. This is the scientific reference number. Sounds like we have a little background music. Assuming it's someone's ring, we figured it would end at some point. So we've labeled this variant 1 because we hope to provide you with additional genetic information down the line, which we would name 2, 3, and 4. But if somebody were to look on the internet for more information, this is the scientific reference number, and so we provide that as well. In our standard format, we always tell you what gene this is in or near. This is the chromosomal region is basically the genetic address for the gene. We all have, if you remember back to high school biology, we all have 23 pairs of chromosomes. The first 22 are numbered. And so this is telling you this is on the, can't see from over here, but I think it says the 6th chromosome. And then in every case, there's the normal and expected sequence. You either have at the particular spot we're looking at an A, T, G, or C. In this case, we expect most people to have a G. And in some people, we see a change to an A. And that change to an A is associated with an increased risk of rheumatoid arthritis. This is showing you how common that is. So in about 4% of people, 4 in 100, we would see 2 copies of the A variant, meaning that those people have a greater risk for rheumatoid arthritis. In 35% of people, we see 1 copy of the A, 1 copy of the G. So those people have a slightly increased risk over the general population. And then in the majority of people, 61%, we see 2 copies of the G. That means they have what would be expected, sort of the normal version of this particular spot in the genome. As always, we do try to provide you with family history and information on a non-genetic variant. Again, these are not solely genetic conditions. If we were giving you results for something like cystic fibrosis, that would be different. Cystic fibrosis is an example of a disease where it's caused by a single gene. If you have a mutation in that gene, you will have the disease. That's something called a single gene disorder. One cause, one effect. And the diseases we're talking about here are different than that. They're caused by multiple genes working together in combination with the environment in order to cause a disease. So we want to highlight some of these other risk factors. In this case, we've provided information on family history, smoking, and this particular genetic variant. I think it's important to note that it's not always the genetic information that's the most powerful here. So in this particular case, knowing that you have a family history and having a family history actually has a much stronger impact on your risk than any one particular genetic variant. In this case, this genetic variant, if you have 1 copy of the risk variant, you're about 20% more likely to develop rheumatoid arthritis than somebody who does not have this particular variant. And if you have 2 copies, you're about 1.6 times or 60% more likely to develop rheumatoid arthritis than someone who doesn't have this variant. When we think about family history, in contrast, if you have 1 parent with rheumatoid arthritis, you're 3 times as likely. That's a lot more times. If you have multiple first-degree relatives with rheumatoid arthritis, you're about 9 times more likely to develop rheumatoid arthritis yourself than somebody else. So for those of you in the room who might have rheumatoid arthritis, you can think about this in relation to your children. For example, if you yourself have rheumatoid arthritis and maybe you're the only one in the family, your children would have about 3 times the risk of developing rheumatoid arthritis as somebody who did not have a parent with rheumatoid arthritis, someone without a family history. If you have rheumatoid arthritis and you're one of multiple people in the family, so maybe you have rheumatoid arthritis and you already have 1 child with rheumatoid arthritis, then another child of yours would have about 9 times the risk. So a significant increase. We see this sort of clustering in families. If you also remember back to your results for lupus, which we released maybe a year ago, the risk for lupus is also influenced by having a family history of basically any autoimmune disease. So if you yourself have rheumatoid arthritis, that increases the risk that your children could develop lupus as well. And if you're interested in more in that, feel free to look back at your results and contact myself or our other genetic counselor, and we'd be happy to talk you through that. Finally, as a small glimpse into the environmental component of rheumatoid arthritis, we do provide a risk related to smoking. So people who are currently smokers have about twice the risk of developing rheumatoid arthritis as somebody who's not a smoker. The nice thing, the reason that we try to highlight these non-genetic risk factors is this is really something you can do something about. So for all of our participants out there who are smokers, our hope is that you see this and say, okay, well, I can't change my genes. They are what they are. I got them at birth. But I can stop smoking, and if I stop smoking, that can reduce my risk. Many of the questions that we get from participants relates to the implications for family members and how can I translate this information so that it's useful for my children or other members of my family. So this is just one example. The first thing is you can only predict what genetic result your children will have if both you and your spouse are in the study, or you and the parent of your child, the other parent of your child. Otherwise, we sort of know half the information. So for example, in this case, if we only knew about this woman, right, if we didn't have this information because only the woman was a participant, what we could say is that there's a 50% chance that each of her children will inherit this risk copy. Because we all have 2 copies of every gene in our body. We got one from mom and one from dad. And when you pass your genetic information to your children, you can only pass half of it, right? If we passed everything we had and our partner passed everything they had, our kids have way too much genetic information. That's not a good thing. So we give half of ourselves, our partner gives the other half. So with each children, it's random which one you're going to give. So half the time this woman is going to pass on the G, which is the normal version at this particular spot, and half the time she's going to pass this risk variant that's associated with rheumatoid arthritis. If we know, if both parents are involved in the study, then we can say, okay, well we can think through a little bit more what the risk is for each of the children. So we know that about 25% of the time, each parent is going to pass the G, the quote-unquote normal copy, the one that is not associated with rheumatoid arthritis. And the child is going to have 2 copies of the G. About 50% of the time, one parent's going to pass the A, and one parent is going to pass the G, and the child will have an increased risk, but only that moderate level, that midway point, because they're going to have one normal copy and one increased risk copy. And then 25% of the time, each parent is going to pass the A, the risk copy, and the child will have the stronger increased risk of rheumatoid arthritis. So there's a possibility with almost every result we can estimate what the likelihood is for different children, but we can't know that for sure without testing the kids. If both parents have the same thing, so if this woman was GG and this man was GG, we can say children did not inherit this risk factor, right? Because if the parents don't have it, the kids can't have it. It doesn't magically appear from one generation to the next. If both of these parents were AA, so if she was AA and he was AA, we can say the kids are all AA, because you can only give what you have. Your children can only receive what you have. New things don't come up between generations. So just some insight into what the implications are for the next generation. When you look at your own result, you can say, okay, my child either received this one or this one. So if you have 2 copies of the non-risk, the normal version, that's what your kids got from you. If you have 2 copies of the risk version, your children got at least 1 copy of the risk version from you. And then if you have one of each, this would be how they're divided. Just a few limitations to consider. CPMC results are not diagnostic. So we are never going to be able to look at your genes and say, you have rheumatoid arthritis, right? Because there is this strong environmental component. So a genetic test will not be able to diagnose you. We know there are other genetic factors that influence the risk of rheumatoid arthritis that are not included in this report. We do hope to include them down the road as our oversight board reviews them and tells us that we can. Your age, your family history, your lifestyle, all have an impact on your risk for not only rheumatoid arthritis, but the other conditions that we tell you about through this study. We do provide relative risk based on groups of people that are similar to you. So we'll tell you if we have data on the relative risk, so the impact of smoking in a Caucasian population, that's the information we're going to tell you about. If you're African American and we have that data on someone in an African American population, we'll give you that data. So we do try to make it as personalized as possible. You'll notice that we don't add everything up and give you one single risk, and that's because scientists have not quite figured out yet how to add these things together. So think about, you get your genes from your parents and you get your family history from your parents, right? So there's a clear overlap there, and we can't say, okay, this number, here's a 20% risk and here's a 5% risk, let's add them because they overlap. We can't say you multiply them. We can't say cut this one in half and then add a portion of that. Scientists are really still trying to figure out how to mesh these numbers together to give people a more comprehensive risk. So at this point, we're still continuing to give you things one risk component at a time so that you can think about each of the factors that might influence your total risk. We do provide risk for non-genetic factors based on what you told us. So if you receive a result saying you're a smoker, we're telling you that because you told us at some point that you're a smoker. If it's incorrect, let us know and we can update that. We will also be sending you probably sometime in early 2012, we'll be asking you to update your medical history questionnaire. So if things about your medical history have changed, you can provide updates then. We always try to offer seminars like these. You can also read some information on our website about rheumatoid arthritis. You can call and make an appointment to talk with either myself or our other genetic counselor, Tara. If you're a little phone shy, you can email us questions, and we try and answer questions as comprehensively as possible by email. And finally, a couple of last things to highlight. We do have some additional diseases that we are releasing results for in the future: colon cancer, inflammatory bowel disease, which will include information on both Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. And some of you may have seen our advertisements for an optional study related to obesity. If you're interested, I can tell you more about that. Basically, everyone will get obesity results eventually. Right now, you can get them early by participating in an optional research study that involves a couple of extra questionnaires. Just a reminder, the real purpose of this study is to figure out what the utility of personalized medicine information is. What do people do with this, and is it useful? So we do send you questionnaires about every result that we release. I would strongly encourage you to fill those out. That is extremely useful to us. They take about 5 minutes each. And if you complete it, you are entered into a drawing to win a $25 gift card. So please take the time to do that. And thank you for your attention and your participation.